Hello everyone. This is video for chapters 1 and 2 of the course of Teaching Grammar. Before we take a look at the information, let's focus on the objectives. Okay, the first one is to identify the different approaches a teacher can use to teach grammar, to identify the importance of the role of the student, setting, course, and teaching situation, to show understanding of the terms prescriptive grammar and descriptive grammar, and finally to identify the 8 parts of speech and its characteristics. Okay, working with the first objective, we see in the reading that there are 2 approaches to teach grammar. The first one is the direct approach. This approach can be seen in grammar classes, composition classes, or test preparation exercises. What the teacher does in these classes is that she writes the grammar point on the board, then explains its importance. She then explains the point, or normally gives a formula, which is basically what we do when we do this, and she gives examples. After this, what follows is some practice on that specific point. What is important here when working with the direct approach is that the teacher is able to create a connection and to relate the grammar point to students' actual language needs. This is very common when you take a look at Costa Rican books and how the examples that they use are based on Costa Rican history or facts or things related to our country. On the other side, we have the indirect approach. In this indirect approach, there is some awareness on part of the teacher on what is the grammar point to be taught, and they make sure that this grammar point is included in the class material. What the teacher has to decide, or what the teacher decides actually, is whether or not these points are mentioned explicitly or not. So, this type of approach is going to be found when ELL teachers are teaching a special content course, for example, ESP, or any of the other courses in which there's a subject matter behind, for example, math, science, or history. Besides the approach used to teach grammar, we also have other aspects to consider. First of all, the learner objectives. Each student that comes into our classroom has a different reason to learn English. When you have little kids or teenagers that they are in high school, well, sometimes that objective has been determined by their parents and not them. But still, we have to create in them some reason to learn English, probably to be able to connect to their favorite actor, their favorite actress, watch movies, listen to music. When we work with adults, the objectives change a little. And here we're going to find adults who want or who need to learn the language in order to get a promotion, to be able to communicate better, even to travel, or why not meet the love of their life. Knowing exactly what the objectives of one's students are is going to be very important, because that's going to determine the amount and the type of grammar to be taught. Consider the example of a course for taxi drivers, English for taxi drivers, And if you think about their needs in terms of the language, they are not going to need to learn to write in English. Basically, what they need to do with the language is to be able to communicate. And very specific topics, giving directions, some tourism points. This is going to determine for the teacher what type of activities are done in the classroom. The second aspect to be considered is course logistics. Okay, this refers to the amount of time that the teacher has in class and for students to work with it outside. A teacher may want to cover too many things, but if time is not available, then she would have to make decisions on what things can be included and which ones are going to be left behind. And finally, the other one is course location. Depending on where the course is taught, the name of the course is going to change. Okay, we're going to have ESL courses, EFL courses, or K12, ESL. Here, what happens is that what you take into consideration is whether or not the student has the option to work with the language outside the classroom. Okay, if English is outside the classroom, then it would be an ESL class. If, like the case in Costa Rica, there are very few or very limited opportunities to practice the language outside the class, then that would be EFL. And K-12 ESL refers to the students who enter primary or high school and they have to learn the language, and besides that, pass primary or high school. What we have to take into consideration, no matter the location, is to try to use locally known topics so the students can create connections with the language and with what they know. And one of the most important things is to know exactly if the grammar issue is going to be problematic for a learner. Think about adjectives. When we work with adjectives in Spanish, we're used to saying rosas rojas. So our adjectives carry different things. They carry plural form, they carry feminine morpheme, and also they go after the noun. In English, this all changes because the adjective doesn't have any change and it goes before the noun. So that would be an important thing to consider when working with Spanish speakers. What happens with the teacher? Well, no teacher can focus on something that he or she doesn't even recognize. Okay, grammar is not about labels, it is about helping learners acquire the grammatical patterns of English. That is why the teachers need to know first what these issues are. It is very important for the teacher to know the grammar that is going to be taught. If you're not very good at grammar, then probably you should go home and do some review of the grammar content to be taught, to make sure that you understand all the little things and all the little components and parts of it. Another important aspect considered in the chapter is the grammar errors that native speakers make. And you may say, why would a native speaker make an error or a mistake? Well, the theory says that we are so focused, or their minds are so focused on the content of the message that they don't pay as much attention as what they should do with the language they use. Okay, as opposite to what English language learners do, right? They're constantly monitoring the language that they use, and they try to see what mistakes they are making and correct them. Grammar becomes very important because it's a key component of your style, the way you speak and write in the language. And the chapter refers to this as when we decide what type of language we use. And we do the same thing in Spanish. We know how to talk formally and how to talk in not such a formal way. But this is something that we decide. English speakers as a group tend to recognize that certain errors seem to be made more often by uneducated speakers who are in a lower socio-economic group, and that committing these errors tends to identify a speaker as a member of a group. The same thing, I guess we might all agree, happens in our language, right? There are mistakes you don't expect educated people to make, and yet still sometimes you listen to them. Then we have two types of grammar. We have been trying to figure out who says what is correct in the English language. Well, prescriptive grammar is the one that prescribes or dictates exactly what should or shouldn't be said or used. This type of grammar establishes a set of rules based on what is considered normal by educated speakers within the language group. According to prescriptive grammar, language doesn't change, okay? It's something that is going to stay like that. Descriptive grammar, on the other side, describes how language is actually used. It accounts for current usage, and consequently acknowledges that over time, language will change, okay? And we saw the example in the chapter with the use of whom. Probably according to descriptive grammar, there will be a moment in which whom stops being used, right? There are other examples that we can think of, the use of if I were for the conditional. This is something that has been changing. One of these days I saw that count and non-count nouns, the definitions and the type of noun has changed a lot. And those are the effects of descriptive grammar. Then the chapter finishes with the 8 parts of speech. We're not going to cover them with the definitions and everything. I guess this is something we all handle and manage. Anyways, you can go back to your chapter and review them. We know that the 8 parts of speech are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, conjunctions, prepositions, and interjections. If we look into other books, we may find articles as well, which have been taken out from adjectives. How do teachers teach the 8 part of speech? Well, they're going to give a definition, then they provide a sample phrase where only one part of speech can be used, which is called a slot. It's a phrase that you fill in with that part of speech. And what the teacher needs to do is to consider if this part of speech is used differently in the student's native language. Just remember the example I gave you about adjectives, right? These are the 8 parts of speech. You see these in this chart. They separated articles from adjectives, although they have basically the same function. And we have the definition, some examples. And the slot is explained in this third column that we have here. You can see it. It's a different way to explain what the slot refers to. Thanks a lot for sticking with us. Sorry for the sounds behind. This is a very basic video, and although I tried cars not to pass by, they've been passing by. Hopefully this video helped you understand. If you have any questions or ideas, please bring them to class, and see you in a couple of hours. Bye-bye.